after getting me fired and labeled mentally unstable by my boyfriend so he could flirt with my manager and pocket a bonus. I found out he forgot to delete our shared Google Drive that contained proof of everything, so I forwarded it to HR. I still remember the way everyone looked at me that morning, like I was contagious, like I'd done something sick or desperate. I walked into the office, my badge still clipped to my blazer, and the whispers started before I even reached my desk. "Did you hear?" someone muttered near the break room. "She lost it over him." At first, I thought they were talking about someone else. Then I saw him, Chris, leaning casually against my manager's desk, pretending not to notice me. But I saw the smirk, the one he used to flash when he thought he was clever. Within an hour, HR called me in. The woman sitting behind the desk, a corporate type I barely knew, had a file open in front of her. My name was on every page. She looked at me like I was already guilty. "Several people," she said carefully, "have expressed concern about your behavior toward Chris." I laughed at first. I thought it was a joke. Then she said words that made my stomach drop. "He said you've been showing up uninvited, sending erratic messages, and creating a hostile environment." I tried to explain, tried to say we'd been dating for over a year, that I wasn't stalking him, he was my boyfriend, but she just tilted her head with that HR pity look. "Chris said he ended the relationship weeks ago. He's concerned for your mental health." By the time the security guard showed up, I was shaking too hard to talk. They walked me out like I was dangerous. My coworkers didn't say a word. Outside, I sat in my car and stared at my phone. He had blocked me on everything: Instagram, texts, even Venmo. And then I saw a notification pop up, my rent reminder. 2 days overdue. He'd told me he'd help cover it this month, since I'd loaned him money for his car payment. The same car he drove to my apartment every night until 3 days ago. That night, while I sat in the dark trying to figure out how to explain to my landlord that I'd just lost my job, Chris posted a photo on Instagram. He was at dinner with Rachel, my manager. The caption said, "New beginnings." It was like a slap. I thought about all the nights we'd stayed up together, all the promises he'd made. And now he was sitting across from my boss, the same woman who'd signed off on my termination, laughing over wine like none of it mattered. 2 days later, I learned he got the promotion I'd been working toward for months. The one Rachel had told me was on hold. When I confronted him outside his new office, he just smiled and said, "She's got power, you don't." Then he leaned close and whispered, "You were never built for this game, babe." I thought that was the end of it, that he'd taken everything he could. But then, one sleepless night, I opened my old Google Drive account, the one we used to share photos and budgets on. I guess he forgot to delete it. And inside, in a hidden folder titled Backups, I found something that made my hands go cold, something that could destroy him completely. When I met Chris, he wasn't the kind of guy who screamed manipulator. He was charming in that quiet, confident way, the type who remembered how you liked your coffee and sent good morning texts without fail. We met at the company's summer mixer in Seattle. I worked in project coordination. He was in marketing, a few levels below me then. At first, I wasn't even interested. He seemed too polished, the kind of guy who rehearsed compliments. But he was persistent. He'd stop by my desk just to ask about a report, or offer to walk me to my car after late meetings. I let my guard down slowly, then all at once. The thing about office relationships is, once you cross that line, it's hard to separate your professional life from your personal one. We tried to keep it quiet, but people knew. He'd show up with my favorite muffins from the cafe downstairs, or we'd take lunch breaks together and pretend to talk shop. The real shift started about 6 months in. That's when he started talking about ambition. He'd say things like, "You play it too safe, babe. You've got to think bigger, be smarter." He was obsessed with promotions, climbing. I thought it was drive, but later I realized it was desperation. He didn't have a degree, so he was always overcompensating, always trying to look like the smartest person in the room. And when my manager, Rachel, started taking notice of me, he got weirdly tense. She'd call me into her office to discuss projects, and afterward he'd ask, "So what did she want? Why's she always talking to you?" At the time, I thought he was being protective. Now I know it was envy. By that winter, he had convinced me to move in with him. I left my apartment to save money and help him get stable. I paid half the rent, plus groceries, plus helped cover his credit card payments when he forgot a few. Then, in March, he started pulling away. He'd get home late, say he was working on a confidential campaign, and act irritated if I asked questions. I found a wine glass with lipstick on it in our sink once. He said a friend came over to brainstorm. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him because I'd built my life around him at that point. The first real crack appeared when he, accidentally, left his Slack messages open on our shared laptop. I saw him complaining about me to Rachel, calling me over-emotional and hard to manage. He even joked that I used tears as a management strategy. That was the same week she started assigning him more leadership tasks, and me, fewer. When I confronted him, he laughed it off, said I was overreacting, that I'd misread a joke. He kissed my forehead and said, "Stop worrying. We're a team, remember?" A week later, HR invited him to a mentorship breakfast with senior staff. Rachel was hosting it. He told me she was just networking for him, helping him grow. But he came home that night smelling like her perfume. I recognized it instantly. It was the same one she always wore in meetings, sharp, floral, expensive. Still, I said nothing. I swallowed every suspicion because I didn't want to be that jealous girlfriend. And then, a month later, the emails started. Anonymous tips sent to HR claiming I was unstable, showing up unannounced, crying in hallways. Someone even attached screenshots of texts that looked like they were from me, begging him to take me back. Only I hadn't written them. He'd been setting me up for weeks. And the day I walked into HR to defend myself, he was already there, pretending to cry, saying he didn't want to press charges. They believed him. But what I found in that Google Drive, in that hidden backups folder, proved everything. He'd been documenting me, recording, editing, fabricating, and he was sloppy enough to leave the evidence in my account. The folder was massive, nearly 20 gigabytes. At first, I thought it was just old receipts and shared bills, the usual stuff. But then I opened a subfolder called Work Stuff, and my heart started hammering. Inside were screenshots, voice recordings, fake email drafts, all labeled with dates that matched the timeline of my meltdown. The first recording I clicked was a snippet of my voice, only it wasn't. It sounded like me, but off. Like someone had used one of those AI voice tools. The clip had me saying, "I can't live without you, Chris. If you don't take me back, I'll tell everyone." I froze. He'd created fake audio messages to make it sound like I was harassing him. Then there were the screenshots. Text conversations that looked real, but if you zoomed in, you could tell the bubbles were uneven, like someone had edited them. He'd written entire dialogues where I was supposedly begging him not to leave me, threatening to ruin his career. He'd been building a case against me, probably for months. But what broke me wasn't the fakes, it was the real ones. Real screenshots of our private messages, intimate stuff I'd sent when I trusted him completely. Pictures, confessions, late-night texts. He'd saved everyone. Some were captioned things like leverage or insurance. That's when it hit me this wasn't a breakup. It was a takedown. I remembered that last week before I got fired, when HR had started acting cold toward me. How Rachel had stopped CCing me on important threads. How Chris had suddenly gotten access to a confidential project that I'd led for over a year. It wasn't random. He'd been feeding her information about me, my work, maybe even the department's internal issues. He'd been using me as a stepping stone, and when he got what he wanted, he cut me out and rewrote the story. The part that made me sick was how believable it all looked. The fake texts were time-stamped perfectly. The audio clips were just real enough to make anyone doubt me, and there were copies of emails between him and Rachel discussing how to proceed with the sensitive HR matter. He called me volatile. She replied, "Don't worry, we'll handle it discreetly." I've seen this before. Reading that, I felt something in me break. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was humiliation. He'd played me like a long con and she'd helped him. Together, they dismantled my career, my reputation, and my sanity. But then, buried deep in one folder labeled security footage, I found something he never meant for me to see. A screen recording of a Zoom call between him, Rachel, and HR, from 2 days before I got fired. He must have saved it accidentally during one of his paranoid little evidence-keeping binges. In it, Rachel was smiling. She said, "Once this is over, we can move forward with your transition plan. I'll make sure the board approves your raise immediately." And then Chris, smirking that same smug smirk, replied, Guess it pays to date your boss. They both laughed. That was the moment I stopped crying. Something inside me clicked, cold, clear, methodical. He thought he'd erased every trace of what really happened, but he'd left the truth right where I could find it. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to use it. Not just to clear my name, but to burn both of them down. I watched the video with my hand over my mouth until my fingers went numb. It started as one of those ordinary lobby cams, grainy, slightly lagging, timestamp in the corner. At first it looked like nothing. Me, 3 afternoons earlier, approaching my desk with a folder in my hand. But then the angle shifted, the camera panned down the corridor, and I saw him, Chris, rounding the corner a second after me. He glanced up and down the hallway like a man doing a job, slid into the empty cube beside mine, and pulled something small from his jacket. It wasn't until he reached under my keyboard that my stomach turned cold. He fished out a folded printout, tucked it deliberately into my desk drawer, closed it, and walked away carrying a coffee cup like a man who'd just done a favor. I rewound the clip. I watched it 3 more times. Every time his face looked more animal than human, calm, practiced. The timestamp matched the day HR said I'd left my things in a mess after an outburst. The printout. The exact fake screenshot HR had shown me when they accused me. He staged it. He planted the evidence. I braced myself to breathe again and noticed another file in the folder, a private Slack export labeled Jenna Convo. Jenna, my closest ally at work, the one who'd lent me sugar during late nights, who'd texted me the day I was escorted out with "This is not you. I'll talk to Rachel." The export was a chain of messages between her and Rachel that made my chest ache. Casual jokes about handling the drama, screenshots of my private texts, and one line that stopped my heart, left the folder under her keyboard, should sway HR. Jenna had walked past me in the hallway the day Chris planted the printout. She'd said something like, "Rough day, huh?" and smiled like we were friends. She'd been the one who gave Rachel the nudge and maybe the folder. She'd lied, and she'd done it smiling. I tried to focus. The drive had more: invoices, meeting notes with redactions, and sliding scale calendars mapping who would be inconvenienced if certain systems were audited. There were bank transfers flagged suspiciously to a shell company with the same address as a cheap mailbox in downtown Seattle. A folder titled Bonuses contained emails that looked like they were from Rachel approving an urgent consultant payout. The payout was to someone with Chris's initials. He hadn't just been charming his way up the ladder, he'd been siphoning money, and when the risk of exposure crept close, he'd used me as the sacrificial lamb. I felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed. Every little kindness I'd believed was real: dinners, walks, "we'll get through this," texts, suddenly read as parts of a long con. Jenna's name kept repeating like a bad chorus. The lunch where she'd left early the day HR started, the time she accidentally deleted a thread I'd asked to keep. She'd been there long enough to know my rhythms and long enough to plan my collapse. I clicked to another file and nearly threw up. A short, shaky video titled Planting Proof, 3:12 p.m. It showed Chris under my desk, his face close to the camera this time, talking into his sleeve as if giving directions. The file stopped as footsteps approached. Jenna's silhouette crossed the frame, leaned in, and whispered something I couldn't make out. Then she straightened, gave a small theatrical sigh, and walked away. They'd rehearsed it together. They'd staged the emails, recorded fake voicemails, funneled money, and then used my name as the alibi when HR needed a story that looked neat. I sat there in my kitchen at 2 a.m. with the glow of my laptop on my face, realizing the scope of what I'd found and the cost of what it would mean to expose them. Someone on that video saw me as a problem to be solved. Someone else smiled as they solved it. And the last file in the folder, a document titled Plan B if she fights back. The cursor blinked at me like a dare. I closed the laptop and felt, for the first time since they'd escorted me out, something that was not pure panic. It was cold and precise. I was angry in a different way now, not wounded, but activated. I knew what I had to do. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there in the dark, the glow from my laptop reflecting off the half-empty wine glass on my table. Every few minutes, I'd scroll through the drive again, like my brain didn't trust what my eyes had seen. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't unstable. They really did it. By sunrise, I stopped shaking and started planning. First, I copied the entire Google Drive, Every folder, every timestamp, every incriminating message. I uploaded duplicates to 3 different cloud accounts under fake names. Then I exported the file structure and printed a few key screenshots. I learned my lesson: always keep paper. Digital trails can vanish, print doesn't. Next, I started mapping the timeline. I wrote it out on my wall like a crime board. The day Chris first complained about Rachel, the week Jenna started helping me with reports, the exact date those fake emails appeared. It all fit too perfectly to be coincidence. They'd been doing this for at least 2 months before HR ever called me in. I remembered something then, a tiny detail from my final HR meeting. When they escorted me out, the security guard handed me a sealed envelope with exit interview details on it. I'd been too humiliated to look at it that day, but I dug it out now. Inside, there was a non-disclosure agreement. My signature was on it, except I never signed it. My stomach flipped. The signature was forged, down to the little heart I used to dot the I in my name. Someone had forged legal paperwork to silence me. That's when the fear turned into fuel. I called my cousin Luke. He's a cybersecurity analyst who freelances for small businesses. He owed me a favor after I helped him cover rent last year. I told him, hypothetically, if someone faked HR documents and created doctored evidence, how do I prove it? He paused. Hypothetically? Yes, he chuckled. You'd need metadata, file histories, and if you can trace edits back to a company device or IP, you've got them dead to rights. That's all I needed to hear. I sent him a few of the files from the drive, stripped of names, just metadata samples. He called me back an hour later, his tone completely different. Whoever did this is an idiot. These edits came from the company server. And not just any account, they're tied to someone with admin clearance. Rachel had admin clearance. Luke told me how to preserve the evidence properly so nothing could be dismissed in court as tampered. I followed every step to the letter. Then I started looking into Rachel's background. Her LinkedIn was spotless, but when I dug deeper, through old press releases and archived company newsletters, I found a pattern. She'd been at 2 other firms before ours. At both, there were sudden HR restructuring events. At both, she'd been promoted right after the alleged incidents. Different names, same script. She'd done this before. By evening, I had everything organized in folders labeled by category: fraud, HR collusion, evidence tampering, financial misconduct, and personal harassment. I even color-coded them. That's when I saw something that made me pause, a document I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't part of the fakes or the recordings. It was an email draft written by Chris but never sent. The subject line read, "We're not alone in this," the message body said. "Once it's finalized, she'll take the fall. You'll get the title, I'll get the payout. After that, it's your call what we do about him." Him? Who the hell was him? There was someone else involved, someone above Rachel, maybe even in upper management. Someone who'd been promised something bigger. That's when I realized the revenge couldn't just stop with Chris and Rachel. There was a third player. And I had to find out who it was before they found out I was still in the game. 2 days later, Luke called me again, voice tight. "Hey, you didn't tell me your company was under active audit." My heart stuttered. "What?" "Yeah. The server your ex used, it's being scrubbed. Like right now, someone's remotely deleting logs. But here's the weird part. The commands aren't coming from your office network. They're coming from a private server in Bellevue. High-level clearance." That was the moment I realized this went beyond Chris or Rachel. Someone higher up was covering their tracks fast. I asked Luke to stall the wipe, but he said whoever was doing it had encryption access above even Rachel's admin level. That meant only one person: Derek Hughes, the regional operations director, Rachel's direct superior. I'd met him once. Mid-40s, perfect smile, corporate golden boy. The kind of guy who called every woman kiddo. I remember how he looked at Rachel in meetings, that too familiar smirk, the same one Chris had when he thought no one was watching. I started to connect dots that I hadn't dared to before. Rachel wasn't the top of this mess. She was working for him, maybe even protecting him. I asked Luke to dig deeper, and what he found made my skin crawl. Derek was listed as the consulting supervisor on several of the fraudulent invoices Chris had funneled through that fake company. Meaning, Derek had approved the money. Rachel signed it. Chris collected it. 3 people, 3 roles, 1 scheme. They'd set up a loop, Derek handled the corporate side, Rachel buried the evidence in HR, and Chris made the dirty money look like consulting bonuses. And when the numbers started to look suspicious, they needed someone to take the fall for misconduct. Someone expendable. Someone naive. Me. I didn't know whether to scream or laugh. I'd been in love with a man who was basically a foot soldier in a corporate fraud ring. But then came the twist inside the twist, the part that made me actually shiver. While I was combing through the drive one more time, I found a small, encrypted folder buried under a fake system file labeled logstemp. It was password protected, but the metadata said it had been accessed last by Chris's account 2 weeks before my termination. I tried every password I could think of, our old cat's name, his birthday, even Rachel's name. Nothing worked. Then, out of habit, I tried my own birthday. The file unlocked instantly. Inside were 7 video clips. The first one looked like footage from someone's office camera, low angle, time-stamped 1:14 Rachel, sitting at her desk, face lit by her monitor, talking to someone off-screen. Then the camera shifted slightly and Derek stepped into frame. He closed the door behind him. Their conversation was quiet but clear. He was nervous. She wasn't. Derek, if this goes sideways, Rachel, it won't. HR has her signature. Chris is handling the rest. Derek, and the funds, Rachel, already cleared. You'll have your share by Friday. Then she leaned back and smiled at him in that slow, deliberate way that told me everything I needed to know. They weren't just partners in fraud. They were sleeping together. I watched all 7 clips, each one more incriminating than the last, discussing payout schedules, manipulating compliance records, even practicing their damage control narrative in case someone talked. I sat back in my chair, shaking. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was evidence of organized corruption. Chris was their pawn, Rachel was the enforcer, Derek was the architect. And the fool who'd loved the pawn, me, just happened to be holding the detonator. I realized something else too. If Derek was scrubbing the company servers, it meant he knew someone still had copies of the evidence. He didn't know it was me, but if I moved too early, he'd find out. So I needed to be smarter, slower. Meaner, I texted Luke, "Don't touch the system again. Let them think the cleanup worked. I'll handle it from here." He replied with one line, "You're planning something, aren't you?" Yes, I was. Because the only thing worse than being destroyed by a liar is letting them think they got away with it. And when I was done, none of them would ever work again. For a while, I kept wondering what kind of person could look me in the eye, tell me he loved me, and at the same time build a file to ruin me. One night I got my answer. It wasn't what I expected. It wasn't even clever. It was worse than that. Luke had managed to trace one of the scrub commands from Derek's server to a home IP in Everett, Chris's home. Which made no sense because Chris didn't have that kind of access. We cross-checked timestamps. He'd been online during the wipe. That meant Derek or Rachel had given him the clearance. So I went to his apartment. I told myself it was to grab the last of my stuff. But really, I needed to see what kind of man he'd become when no one was watching. He opened the door looking smug and freshly showered, barefoot, a glass of scotch in his hand. "Didn't think I'd see you again," he said. I held up my phone. "I found the files." He didn't flinch, he actually smiled. "Of course you did." That smile froze me. "Why, Chris? You could have just left." He leaned on the doorframe like he was giving a TED talk. "Because leaving doesn't pay. You think Rachel just handed me a promotion because she liked my PowerPoints? No. She needed someone dumb enough to get their hands dirty, someone HR wouldn't question." He took a slow sip. "That's you, babe. You were perfect. Loyal, clean record, the kind of girl they'd believe had a breakdown. I gave them a story that made sense." He said it so casually, like it was a business deal. "Rachel and Derek set up the shell company," he went on, "but they couldn't route the money without someone to sign off from your side. You had the internal vendor codes. Once you clicked approve on those forms, it was easy to say you'd done it under stress. HR loves that word, stress." I felt my hands shaking, but he wasn't done. "You want the truth," he said. "I never even planned to date you at first. Rachel told me to get close to you, said you were smart but lonely. She thought if you trusted me, we could push some things through accounting faster. Then, well, you fell in love, made it easier." The words hit like glass. "You used me," he tilted his head. "I used everyone, that's how you survive here. Derek gets his cut, Rachel gets her title, I get out of debt. And you," he smirked, You get to learn how the world actually works. It wasn't rage I felt then. It was something colder, quieter. He'd never see. People as people. To him, everyone was leverage. Even Rachel, he admitted it a moment later, almost bragging. She thinks I'm hers, he said. She doesn't know I've been recording our calls. If she ever turns on me, I'll bury her too. That's when I understood what kind of man he really was. He didn't just want success. He wanted control. He wanted to hold everyone by the throat, to keep files and backups and dirt on anyone who could threaten him. It wasn't ambition, it was compulsion. When I left, he called after me. You can't beat me, you know. She's got power, you don't. He was right about one thing. Rachel had power. But he'd forgotten who built the story that gave it to her. And I still had every file, every voice clip, every forged signature, plus one more thing he didn't know about. The videos of him planting evidence and bragging about it to Rachel. He'd recorded his own destruction. I walked back to my car and sat there for a long time, letting that sink in. He thought manipulation was strength, that empathy was weakness. He'd never understood that the people who survive are the ones who know how to wait. And I was done waiting. Tomorrow I was going to light the match. I didn't light the match the way movies do, no dramatic phone call or viral post. I was boring and methodical. I used the thing they trusted most. Paperwork, signatures, and the idea that nobody thinks small people can move fast. First, I filed a criminal complaint with the state attorney's fraud unit. I walked into the downtown office clutching a thick binder, printouts of the drive, the Zoom clip, payroll anomalies, the forged NDA, the Plan B doc. I watched the woman behind the desk read it, her expression changing from polite to sharp, and felt that first little rush of relief. They opened an investigation. Next, I found the one place Derek couldn't scrub, public exposure. I spent a week building a dossier for an investigative journalist at a business outlet. I didn't send everything at once. I sent them breadcrumbs, one invoice, one recording, the security clip of Chris planting the printout, enough to make the reporter curious and enough to make a corporate lawyer start sweating. The reporter called, asked questions, and then asked more. I answered calmly. I'd rehearsed my words until they sounded like facts instead of wounds. But the move that actually killed them was small and legal and sickeningly effective. I subpoenaed the company's internal vendor, approvals through the attorney's office handling my case. That meant even if Derek scrubbed servers, he couldn't clean the real-world paper trail. Signed purchase orders, check requests, and the physical receipts that had been couriered through the company's APO box. Those papers existed outside his encrypted reach. When the subpoenas came, people in the finance department started connecting dots with the same grim look I'd worn for months. The week after the subpoenas, HR froze Rachel's account and placed her on leave. Derek took an unpaid administrative break, pending review. Chris, he resigned before they could fire him. He sent a terse email about personal reasons and walked out with a duffel. The reporter ran the piece 2 days later with a headline that shredded the phrase, workplace integrity. It felt like a literal ripping sound in my chest. Legal action is slow and clinical. I hired a lawyer for the employment suit and let the criminal process do its job. Depositions revealed the Zoom recordings, the forged NDA, and the shell company. In court, I watched Derek lean forward until his knuckles went white and Rachel pretend not to hear. Jenna refused to show up and was named in the filings. The company terminated her shortly after. What I didn't expect, the last, bitter twist, was how empty victory felt. My landlord accepted the first check from the settlement, my bank got my account straight, and the promotion that had been stolen from me was returned in a company memo to some alternate candidate. But no one could fold back the months of rumors, the way people looked at me with suspicion on the sidewalk, or the landlord who paused before renewing my lease. Reputation, once shredded, doesn't stitch up neatly. It scars. I held a settlement conference where Rachel tried to apologize, a thin thing with rehearsed remorse. I told her what I'd always wanted to, that she lost more than a title. She lost whatever small moral edge she thought she had. She stared like she couldn't believe anyone would call her out. Derek refused to meet my eyes. Chris sent me a message that said 2 words, "Good luck." I blocked him. The final satisfaction came quietly. Months later, an industry panel invited me to speak about workplace ethics. I stood under a stage light, and told a room of HR directors and lawyers what happens when power corrupts. I didn't gloat. I told the truth, clipped and precise. Afterward, a woman in a navy suit, someone who could call hiring committees, tapped my shoulder and said, "We'll be in touch." That was the small, real thing that stitched a thread of possibility back into my life. I still have nights where the humiliation sneaks up and tastes like metal. But when it does, I pull up the video where Chris plants the printout and watch his face shift when Jenna walks by, like a man who realizes he's been outplayed by a life he didn't bother to understand. I keep the binder on a shelf in my bedroom. It's ugly and heavy and necessary. They wanted to teach me a lesson about who holds power. I learned a better one. Power is only as safe as the people who witness it. And sometimes the quietest witness is the most dangerous. Kicker, I walked away with my job title gone, my rent covered, and my reputation in pieces. But I kept the one thing they never accounted for: patience.